All right, so the time is now. Welcome everyone to Redefining Benefits, what employees will look for in 2023. A couple of housekeeping items that I'd like to run through. This webinar will last for about 30 minutes. The session is being recorded, and we'll make sure to send it out via email tomorrow in case you'd like to review any information or share it with the rest of your team. Feel free to ask questions through Zoom's Q&A feature during the duration of the webinar, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end if time allows. Otherwise, we'll make sure to reach out privately and get those questions answered. So just to do an intro, my name is Ahmed Raza. I'm a B2B marketing specialist here at Branch. I primarily work behind the scenes, curating content around the talent landscape. It feels great to pull the curtain for once and present my face. I'm joined by Matt Ball from Financial Health Network, our expert in residence today. I'll attempt to extract as much information as I can by questioning Matt on the state of benefits, key trends in the talent marketplace, and strategies being used by the best in the business. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Thank you, Ahmed, and thanks to the Branch team for inviting me. I'm Matt Ball, Vice President and Workplace Market Lead at the Financial Health Network. I've had a long career in and around employee benefits, both as an HR executive and as a recovering labor and employment lawyer. So really excited today to share some of our perspective and insights on how workplace benefits are evolving and the opportunities for leaders to improve the lives of their people.
Certainly. Can't wait to get to the questions. Thank you, Matt. Before we dive in, just to quickly describe Branch, we're a fintech that helps employers accelerate payments to workers and empower working Americans with a stack of tools that include earned wage access, cashless tips and mileage, 1099 contractor disbursements, a pay card alternative, and digital banking services. Matt, do you want to give a quick run through on the Financial Health Network?
Absolutely. We are a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to improve financial health for all. We really do this by engaging a wide range of stakeholders, from business leaders to HR executives to financial services leaders to innovators to policymakers, really with the idea that people's financial lives are not contained to one sphere and that it's really access to financial benefits comes in many different forms and functions. My team and I lead the workplace focus for our efforts. And ultimately, our approach is we are product agnostic and what work centric. So we care most about what are the types of solutions and interventions that actually help improve the financial health of the people that are receiving those benefits.
Fascinating company indeed, and I'm a huge fan of your work. So what have we got on the agenda today? We'll start with giving you a baseline on where benefits stand today. Then we'll lead into the trends gaining momentum as we approach 2023. And finally, we'll use that information to project winning strategies in the year to come. Okay, so what do benefits look like today? Matt, we all have an idea of what a benefit looks like today, but given your diverse exposure, you've got a unique perspective. How would you describe the state of benefits as they are?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that there are certainly the common types of benefits that you normally see in most workplaces, from the health insurance to the retirement plans to a suite of voluntary benefits. But increasingly, as we think about the financial health or financial wellness benefits, we've seen a real expansion of the types of solutions companies are entertaining. And this is driven primarily by trends that existed prior to the pandemic, but have really accelerated since then. And so we've also, in doing this work, have seen the definition of financial wellness really expand to include more of a total rewards perspective. And so companies really thinking about their compensation approaches, their retirement benefits, their healthcare costs, as well as the emerging and innovative solutions that are really coming into the marketplace that really primarily seek to address the day-to-day financial challenges that individual workers face.
Interesting. Matt, if you were to kind of summarize what we've seen over the last year, like how would you, in like kind of like a short sentence, like how would you describe what we've seen? Just wanted like something that we can leave people with, like this is what we've seen in the last year.
Yeah, focus on day-to-day finances, no doubt about it. And this has really been driven, I think, by the recognition that the ability for folks to function in their daily lives is really dependent upon the essential building block of financial health, which is income. And as that income is really key to helping drive forward the different levers that individuals can use to avail themselves of these solutions. But part of that is also recognizing, and we saw this in a lot of our data, that the day-to-day financial challenges, it's not just about the income, it's also about the ability to have short-term liquidity or to weather the inevitable financial shock. In fact, our research and data continues to show that financial shocks are accelerating in their frequency. And so providing folks with access to that stable base is increasingly a priority that we see with the employers and companies that we work with, which is how do we reinforce folks to a stable base so they can avail themselves of the additional benefits that the employer may provide.
Fascinating. Appreciate that response. Matt, to kind of look in the rearview mirror for a bit, let me ask you, what benefits have you seen pick up the most steam in the last year?
I would say that emergency savings accounts have really picked up a lot of steam, and you see them manifest in two ways. One is after-tax savings features within retirement plans or standalone out-of-plan emergency savings accounts. We've also seen a number of uptick in things like payroll collateralized loan products. Earned waged access has continued to accelerate in utilization. And the idea behind a lot of those types of solutions are how do we help folks manage the day-to-day financial lives in between pay periods, recognizing that most Americans don't have $400 to $500 in savings, and the ability to weather those inevitable financial shocks and to have more accurate day-to-day financial planning and management is one of the places we've seen a real acceleration of interest from employers as they really try to figure out how do we augment our financial health strategies and approaches with tactical solutions to really address the cash flow and liquidity crunches that many workers face.
Interesting. Matt, what would you say is fueling the acceleration? Like what's pushing companies to provide those benefits?
I think it's a growing recognition that financial wellness is not just the domain of the retirement plan. And while long-term savings is certainly an important aspect of financial health, all of our research and our data really reinforces that those day-to-day financial challenges have a ripple effect on financial health of individuals. So I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, we actually saw financial health of the US population improve. And it improved in part because of some of the stimulus payments and one-time benefits that were provided through the government, which most individuals use to reinforce their short-term savings and to pay down debt. And it was a combination of those two things that really accelerated the improvement in financial health. As those programs have faded away, and as inflation has really started to eat into those gains, we just published our 2020 U.S. Financial Health Pulse Survey, and we saw for the first time in 5 years, financial health of the U.S. population decline. And it was largely driven by those day-to-day financial challenges. I also think that the pandemic really removed the last barrier of separation between what employers saw and what into employees' lives. We're talking over Zoom right now, so there's an unprecedented window into our lives. And I think employers really saw the day-to-day financial challenges that their folks were facing and really trying to focus on how do we provide that stable base and reinforce those day-to-day challenges that they're experiencing.
Awesome. An unprecedented window into our lives. I like how you phrased that. I think that we hadn't it's kind of, it becomes difficult to recognize that. And you just stating it that way, I think is helpful. Onto the second leg of the discussion. It's only suiting that we speak about financial health. It's your bread and butter. What are you seeing in terms of people's financial health?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that we're certainly seeing is a growing recognition of the connection between financial health and mental health. And so you're starting to see employers really trying to understand the intersection of these two factors. And in many ways, employers have the most control over the financial health side of this. There was a really interesting report that came out earlier this year that looked at what HR leaders said was their top benefit priority and what workers said their top benefit priority was. And for a lot of HR leaders, they're really leaning into the mental health solutions, given the mental health crisis that is really afflicting a large percentage of the population. But the same HR leaders, when their workers were asked what they saw as the top priority, it was financial health. And so I think one of the things that really underscores is just the real close connectivity of these two things and the opportunity for employers to really understand how financial health drives mental health and how mental health impacts financial health. And that's not to say that there is a perfect solution, because there isn't one. These are dynamic questions. But one of the things that we've seen, and independent research has validated this, is putting people into a financially stable position is one of the bulwarks against exacerbating underlying mental health conditions. And employers have a lot more control over the financial health benefits they can provide and the impact of those benefits than the mental health benefits. It's not to say you shouldn't do mental health benefits. They're really important, but I'll give you a tangible example. There are certain things you can do with financial health benefits that you can't replicate on the mental health or physical health side. So for example, I can't teleport someone to go see their primary care physician to get a preventative screening or to have a conversation about their mental health. But I can't auto-enroll folks into certain financial benefit programs that we know have a material impact and benefit on people's lives. And so I think as employers are really wrestling with the confluence of factors that impact the lives of their workforce, understanding where the greatest opportunity is for impact, and then really using and leaning into those impact opportunities as a way to scale the benefits on some of the other wellness pillars that they may have in place. Healthcare gets a lot of attention because it's usually the largest spend. But actually what we've seen is employers that really help lean into the financial health solutions, in addition to really being creative with the mental health and physical health, are some of the most effective benefit programs that we've seen. And we've worked with a number of companies to help them really think about those strategies.
Interesting. Matt, I'm not sure if we spoke on this before, but I am curious, like, what would you say, like, given like the economic uncertainty and inflation, where do you think people stand? Just because like you have more exposure to the average worker, and you kind of understand the position that they're in, where do you think they stand at this moment in time? Because sometimes as an HR professional, that perspective can be a little bit abstract. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll point to some recent data that we've seen. So our recent U.S. Financial Health Pulse report showed that less than 1/3 of the U.S. population is financially healthy. So what this means for HR leaders, regardless of the organization that they may be working for, is the financially unhealthy are not in the workforce, they are the workforce. And so for a lot of companies, I think really deepening that understanding of what's happening with their people is a necessary prerequisite to designing programs that are really responsive to the needs of the workforce. I think one of the mistakes HR leaders have is the impulse to just add more product to their portfolio. And certainly there are times when adding more product makes sense. But what we've continually seen is employers have a lot of solutions that are out there. They are generally underutilized for a whole host of reasons. And part of that is because taking the time up front to really diagnose and understand the diverse needs of your workforce means you can better tailor and design programs that are responsive to the needs of the workforce. And I think one of the mistakes that I've seen HR leaders make, and I certainly made this mistake when I was an HR leader, was relying on benefit surveys. Our experience that those benefit surveys, while interesting and useful, are really poor predictors of the needs of what people are actually looking for. And so we're big fans of what gets measured, gets managed. And so looking for ways to have product agnostic assessments, to work with focus groups, to really develop that listening apparatus to workers is one of the most effective ways to design programs that are responsive and that meet the needs. A common complaint that we get is, I do all these things for my people and no one uses them. And the question I always ask back when I get that response is, how many people need those solutions? Because if you've got 10% engagement with a particular solution, but only 10% of your workforce needs it, you may have a wildly successful benefit. The problem is absent really knowing what your people need or having some baseline of the different types of needs makes it really hard to structure programs in a way that drives engagement. And so a lot of employers fall back on the field of dreams fallacy, which is they put a bunch of stuff out there and they just hope their folks will find it. Those are typically the recipes we see for low engagement, negative impacts on retention, and a really ineffective way to maximize the spend and investment that employers are making. And so we're big advocates for saying, taking the time up front to understand the needs, to being creative about the tools you use to assess those needs will pay massive dividends long-term. And so while certainly there's an impulse to add solutions, if you don't know what solutions are going to be most impactful, it's usually just a giant waste of spend for most employers.
Fantastic response. I think that was really helpful, Matt. Ricocheting off that, given like these dynamics that you just described, and the evolved circumstances and needs of Americans, what offerings looking ahead into the future do you see taking hold, taking prominence?
Yeah, I would say one of the questions that I get most frequently now are, what are new and emerging housing solutions? And that may seem counterintuitive for an employer. I mean, the days of IBM and the company towns are sort of going the way of the dodo, although we are seeing there is a new company town model emerging. There's a manufacturer in rural Iowa that's investing $30 million into the rural Iowa community in order to build out new housing. But housing is increasingly a real big financial health challenge for workers for a couple of reasons. Number one, as we move towards a more remote and hybrid environment at the same time that it's increasingly difficult to get into a housing situation, the housing crisis that's afflicting the broader population is as much a workplace crisis now as it is a housing crisis, because the house and the place of residence for many folks is a de facto workplace. And so having an unstable workplace is a real challenge and barrier for employers. So we're certainly seeing some employers that are saying, well, not necessarily because of the housing crisis, but pulling folks back into the workplace. I don't think that's going to happen at scale or accelerate anytime in the next year. And so we're really starting to see employers thinking about how do we think about tailoring benefits to get our folks into more stable housing, either on the rent side or on the home ownership side. So we're seeing programs emerge like down payment assistance to get into homes, which is a huge barrier for many workers, just being able to save 20% to get a down payment onto a house, given the accelerating price increases of housing. So that's been a really interesting conversation, and there's lots of innovation that's happening in the market right now thinking about that. Of course, those housing benefits are weighed against the other benefits that employers provide. You're not going to give up your healthcare plan. You're not going to give up your retirement plan. And so I think employers are also really trying to weigh the trade-offs for what programs they should be adding, what programs they should be taking away. And it gets back to my earlier point, which is the only effective way to know that is to have a deep understanding of what your people need. We worked with a large employer headquartered in Texas, and one of the things that they found was they were adding a bunch of new benefits to their portfolio, driven primarily by what their benefit vendors were saying that they needed to add. Coincidentally, those benefit vendors were the one that were selling those solutions. When they actually spent some time doing a 6-month listening tour with their workforce, they've actually shrunk their entire benefit portfolio, have created new engagement pathways, redesigned their intranet, and they've seen massive improvements in both the retention of their workforce, especially at a time when the Great Resignation was still raging, but also saw increased improvements in utilization of their benefits. Again, it just speaks to the fact of really doing the work up front to understand what people need can create more efficient benefit spend, but also make sure that you're actually doing the things that we know build retention apparatuses, which is listening to people, responding to their needs, building that trust nexus, which is really the key to retention and productivity, is having that deep sense of trust with your workforce.
Certainly. Matt, that's a lot of information to leave people with. And I think it's really helpful to kind of have like, information handed to you in that way. But when it comes to like practically executing, how do you suggest that employers keep like a pulse on whether their efforts are aligned with the needs of their employees? Because the needs of employees are constantly shifting, and it's and as we've seen in the last year, like a lot can happen in a short amount of time. So how do they keep a pulse on everything that they've set up, on whether it's actually effective and if it will continue to be effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think part of the way that I answer this is listening to your folks can't be a one and done exercise. It has to be part of sort of an annual process or an annual engagement mechanism that you use with your people. That's number one. The second thing is really understanding the needs of your folks and knowing that they're dynamic means that you have to have partnerships with your vendors or partnerships with your external support networks that are as adaptive and iterative as you want to be. I think one of the challenges that HR leaders face is so much of the decision-making around benefits is filtered through a risk management lens. And when you filter things through a risk management lens in terms of deciding benefits and deciding those things, there are certain calculations you make along the way to mitigate risk, which not to downplay the role of that. Risk is a legitimate thing. But if you reorient it towards how do we provide the greatest amount of human flourishing with our people, it creates a different set of calculations that HR leaders can use to do that. And that's a real mind shift set, I think, for a lot of HR departments, is how do we think about our role as not just providing enough benefits to attract talent, but how do we provide the right type of benefits to improve the lives of our people, which then has the added benefit of driving retention engagement. You know, I've long thought that one of the muscles that HR leaders can continue to develop is thinking of their roles more as research and development as opposed to risk management and benefit deployment. Most companies, either on their proxy statements or in their internal things, talk about their workforce as our most important asset. And I take that at its face. I think that people are the most important asset for any business. And all other aspects of an important business asset, there's extreme care taken to understand what makes that asset function at the highest level. And so reorienting towards a data-driven process, thinking about the role of experimentation and piloting of solutions is another avenue that I think is really starting to gain traction, particularly with larger employers, although there's opportunities for smaller ones. Because if you want to make sure that your most important asset is cared for, you have to treat it like the most important asset, which is not a risk to be managed, but an asset to be cultivated. And so I think that type of mind shift set is something that we're starting to see. One of the fastest growing jobs in human resources is data analytics. I think that's great, because that type of data forward thinking is exactly what's needed in order to accelerate the deep understanding, but also to ensure that you've got programs that work, because no employer wants to spend a lot of money on stuff that doesn't actually do what it's intended to do. And that's a surefire way to lower engagement, both with the benefits, but also lower engagement with your workforce, which increases the acceleration of talent transition. So that's a long-winded way to saying, like, mind shift change is something that we are certainly starting to see in the marketplace around how HR leaders view their role and function. Lots more work needs to be done, but really leaning into cultivating and advancing human potential as a core function of HR is something that we're really excited to be seeing in the market, and we're happy to be a part of that change.
Certainly. I think it's a really great insight that data analytics is the fastest growing role in the industry. I think it's telling that there's a shift in approach to benefits if that's a fast growing role. Matt, so suppose that you're an employer that's established benefits that meets workers' needs pretty well. How do you translate that to a measurable impact on retention and attraction? Like, how do employers get that return on investment? Because ultimately that's what they need to justify those benefits. Like, I might have to do something with marketing or making sure that they're promoting them right. Like, hey, like, we're the one that's providing these for you. How do they create that connection that, you know, we're making things easier for you, and ultimately impact their retention and attraction?
Yeah, this question alone is a 2-hour conversation. So I'll try to summarize it as quick as I can. So
Sure.
one, I think we have to be realistic about ROI. And I think that there's a lot of attention paid to ROI, and sometimes that attention is misplaced. So virtually no employer is going to do a random control 5-year extended academically rigorous study to get to a causation level p-value. That's a fancy way of saying is that proving causation is always going to be a challenge in this environment, because the requirements to doing that type of deep analysis are just not practical given how businesses operate. What is possible, though, is to always start with what's the baseline financial health of a population. And there are a number of ways that organizations can do that. There's administrative data frameworks where you pull in existing HR data to create a profile. We have free resources on our website that organizations can look at to sort of start that process. Once you have that baseline, you can then start to understand where are the needs and where are the opportunities, and start to really put in place the types of interventions and solutions. We talk about ROI in terms of what's the formula you need in order to establish a baseline impact of those programs. And so I think there are really 3 different buckets that organizations can look at. Bucket number 1 is what we just call sort of transactional value. So how many people are using it? How many people need it? Are there any dollar changes that we're seeing as a result of that? So for example, are we seeing decreases in certain negative behaviors? Are we seeing decreases in leakage within plans? Are we seeing improvement in other types of outcomes? That then leads to the second sort of ROI bucket, which is how does it manifest behavior change? How are we seeing folks' behaviors augmented? Because we know that with financial wellness and financial health, it's not just about the economic inputs, it's about the impact on behavior change. So are you seeing increased savings rates? Are you seeing improved enrollments? Are you seeing decreased in things like absenteeism? What are the metrics you can track that correlate to that? And then obviously there's what the C-suite's really interested in, which is how does it impact business performance? And certainly there's lots of attention on productivity and retention, but really understanding how your business measures success. So for a lot of businesses, it's net promoter score. And so we have a number of groups that we work with that are linking their financial health benefits to net promoter score tracking, really trying to understand the connectivity to that. We're also seeing groups that have a ESG investing function or a CSR function are using those reporting in order to sort of provide insight into what's happening with those populations. If your performance metrics are based upon, you know, different types of sales or other metrics, how are you seeing those metrics impacted from a correlation perspective? It's a long-winded way of saying, like, there's no easy way to do ROI. And anyone who tells an HR leader there's an easy way to do ROI is selling snake oil. That doesn't exist. It really takes a concerted data strategy and understanding the difference between correlation and causation. And once you build that apparatus, you then have a reporting function that can provide deeper insights into the impact of your program, as opposed to just relying upon 8 different reports from 8 different spots and trying to sort of piece together what it all means. There's a real opportunity to think about this again from a data-centric perspective, and to do it in a practical way that aligns with the business performance metrics as well as the impact on your people.
Certainly. I think there's also a lot of things that can't necessarily be measured. And if you focus too closely on being scientific with your ROI, you'll kind of risk you'll risk not noticing those implicit impacts.
100%. 100%. In fact, really quick, Ahmed, on that point.
Sure.
So one of the other things that we recommend as a best practice is capturing those human stories. And we worked with a large telecommunications firm. And one of the things that really helped tip their senior leaders into reimagining how they do financial for their workforce was we were able to bring forth stories from workers. Stories of both the extreme hardship that they are experiencing, but also how certain benefits really lifted folks into prosperity. Those human stories, in addition to the hard data, is sort of a best-in-class approach, but that really requires an intentional effort to understand what's happening with your people. We've also seen that using that data and those stories and bringing those to senior leaders, my experience has almost universally been once senior leaders see those things, it's really hard to ignore it. And it's really hard not to take action. And so when we talk about leadership buy-in, you have to be both a data scientist and a storyteller. And that's a really unique skill set, but a skill set that is so woefully needed for modern HR departments.
Certainly adding a story to the numbers, I think, is really helpful for anybody, not just executives, just to get everybody motivated about what you're doing. Adding a story, I think, is great. Matt, I think that's a wrap. I really appreciate you keeping the answers concise and making it digestible for our attendees. It is time for some Q&A. So just going to quickly look at our Q&A section. If anybody's got any last minute questions they want to drop in there, feel free to do so now. Okay. All right. So I see a question here. What's your most recommended method to gauge our workforce's needs? Matt, I think you initially spoke about using surveys, but that isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily a fan of that, or isn't like the best way. But what would you say is the most recommended way to gauge our workforce's needs?
Yeah, so we think that, so from a best practice perspective, we see sort of 3 different lanes here, and not every employer can do all 3. One is you do have certain data points within your benefit plans that can be really illuminating in terms of where you're seeing needs and challenges. So that's number one. And that's usually the easiest thing to do because you can pull that data from your benefit vendors to look at that. And there's a data framework, again, on our website that can provide that insight. I do think surveys are important, but you understand not all surveys are created equal. And if it's amazing the number of surveys that are out there that the recommendations are always to buy more product as opposed to providing that diagnostic. So thinking about sort of neutral diagnostic tools, the CFPB has a great resource. A number of other benefit providers have neutral resources. That's another way. But the best thing and the most fruitful is just talking to your people, whether that's through focus groups, whether that's equipping your managers to have these conversations. Gathering that type of insight and story, some combination of one or all of those 3 things are where we've seen the most impact in understanding what people need. But relying on one benefit vendor to tell you what's happening with your folks, we have found that to be actually a pretty ineffective way to understand the needs of people. Certainly
appreciate the attendee that asked that question and your response as well, Matt. So we have another question that just came in here. Any specific benefit programs that are new to engage 18 to 26-year-olds who do not see value in traditional plans?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say 2 things that we're seeing that are continuing to resonate. Student loan support, particularly for individuals graduating college with debt, despite whatever may happen with the Biden administration's debt program. That debt is going to reconstitute in about 4 years, even with the forgiveness. So student loan support is a huge benefit that I don't think employers are going to not have a role in going forward, especially since it's still uncertain as to what's going to happen long term with student debt. The other benefit that we really see that is attractive to younger workers is financial coaching. Financial coaching is another benefit that we see a lot of younger workers really gravitating towards because it provides a real resource. And then the last thing I would say that seems to be really effective is cash flow solutions. So helping younger workers really gain access to tech that can help them manage the ebbs and flows in their income and the day-to-day financial challenges. And there's a whole host of solutions that are out there that really do that. You're right, like retirement plans. Hard to think about a retirement plan if you've saddled with, huge amounts of student loan debt. Housing is really expensive. And so again, it speaks to understanding, and you may have a higher demographic in your workforce that's in this age bracket. That may necessitate a very different benefit strategy than if you have an older workforce. And if you've got the spread, this is one of the reasons why disaggregating data and really understanding needs and then tailoring programs based upon that disaggregation is another trend that we're seeing in the market.
Certainly. Matt, I see about 2 more questions here. If you were to name some examples that are going to be the most impactful going forward, I think they're talking about benefits. I know we spoke about this before, but maybe I think it would be helpful to assess that.
Yeah. So if I had a magic wand, it could do 3 things. And this assumes anything is on the table because that's not always the case. Number one, you've got to ensure that the income you're paying is sufficient for people to meet their daily needs. I think one of the challenges we see in the market is while there's a lot of great innovation, you can't fintech your way out of the fundamental problem of just not making enough money. And so I think understanding where your compensation programs lie. I've certainly in my career as an HR practitioner relied on market-based compensation. I think that is just one data point, but I think you've also got to look at other data points, living wage data, understanding some companies are using what's called a net disposable income metric. Certainly want to do that. I think also providing access to short-term savings or short-term liquidity solutions, things that help folks weather the inevitable financial shock. And there's a lot of different ways that manifests is really important. Certainly retirement plans are an important component to this. But the thing that I would say is also emerging is equity interest. So granting a greater percentage of your workforce access to be an owner in the business is another trend that we're really seeing. Groups like Ownership Works, which is really leading some of this work, as well as some benefit vendors that have equity-based programs. Equity in this context being ownership. I think those are hugely influential, and Rutgers University has done longitudinal research on the impact of equity programs on financial health.
Oh, amazing response. I appreciate that, Matt. I see one last question here, and I'm actually interested in this one as well. How do you see the crunch for talent panning out in the next year?
Yeah. So there was some recent job numbers that were reported. We are certainly seeing signs of the Great Resignation slowing down. I think we're seeing a tightening of the labor market. So I think over the last several years, we're in a very unique environment. I think talent over the next year is going to be less mobile, particularly if we continue to see the macroeconomic trends sort of constrain the broader economy. So I think that's going to continue to be placed, but I think that also presents employers with a real opportunity to shore up their programs, particularly for some key talent, which we are still seeing, particularly with key talent positions, huge mobility, still lots of jobs that are opening. But I think that we've lived through a pretty remarkable period over the last several years, unlike anything we've really ever seen. And so I think we're starting to come back towards a baseline, but employers that are thinking forward and really trying to solve for the future as well as the here and now are going to be best positioned to retain that talent, especially as we come out of whatever this is that the economy is currently in.
Certainly. Well, Matt, I think we're 6 minutes over time. I really appreciate you sharing your time with me today and having this discussion. It was really helpful for me, and I hope our attendees can relate. Any final thoughts you want to leave people with?
No, just thank you all for your attention and questions. And as you can tell, I love talking about this stuff and so much opportunity for HR leaders in the market. And certainly with partners like Branch, we're really excited about the future of financial health.
For sure, Matt. Your passion is contagious. Thanks again for your time. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you all.